and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Thursday. Tonight, the Prime Minister picks more major projects.
We used to build in this country, and we are building our nation again.
He's going to approve a bunch of projects that were already going to happen.
There's a little deja vu with the second group of major projects getting the government fast-tracked. Much like the first, the list does feature projects that are already underway. We'll find out why with Energy Minister Tim Hodgson and our front bench with Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. We'll look at what the list gets right and what it doesn't. Then, days left for the Prime Minister to rally votes.
I think Canadians, have given us credit for the fact that we're putting the house in order.
We'll talk about who is and who isn't likely to vote for the budget as it makes its way to the floor of the House of Commons for the Liberals, biggest test yet. Plus, Epstein revelations for U.S. President Donald Trump. The White House takes aim at Democrats after newly released emails in the case of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein say the president, quote, knew about the girls. With a looming vote that could see more files released, we'll get the latest live from Washington a little bit later on in this show. First, though,
Each of the projects that we're referring to, the major projects office today, in and of itself is transformational. But the bigger point is that their impacts will be amplified by being part of bigger national strategies to boost Canada's competitiveness, including to realize our country's full potential as an energy superpower.
Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking in British Columbia, announcing 6 projects plus a strategy being referred to the Major Projects Office. That's the newly formed government body to fast-track projects deemed in the national interest. Here they are: the North Coast Transmission Line and Silicium's LNG in British Columbia, Canada Nickel's Crawford project in Ontario, Nouveau Monde Graphite's Meadowini mine in Quebec, Northcliffe Resources' Sisson mine in New Brunswick, and an Iqaluit hydro project to move Nunavut's capital off diesel power. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also in British Columbia this afternoon to respond to that announcement in part. Have a listen.
And yet again today, instead of getting things done, Mark Carney was standing up doing photo ops, announcing that he's going to approve a bunch of projects that were already going to happen. One of them, the Sisson mine in the East Coast. This mine, there was a Liberal minister, Dominic LeBlanc, who said that his government was going to make sure this project got underway within a year, and that was back in 2017. Now today, Mark Carney is re-announcing that same Liberal promise.
So that's Major Projects Take 2. As Mr. Poilievre referred to there, the criticism from the opposition is certainly that it is already, or that it contains projects that are already underway. The Prime Minister, however, insists that that isn't the case. We're going to talk to his Energy and Natural Resources Minister, Tim Hodgson, a little bit later in the show about that. First, though, let's bring in our front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's a senior advisor now with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is the former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney and a former Liberal cabinet minister. He's now a senior counsel and strategic advisor for Castles. CTV political analyst and former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is here. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now CEO of Tony Clement International. Hi, everybody. Feels like a lot has happened in the last week, culminating with this announcement today. Christy, I'll start with you. What purpose do you think strategically for the Prime Minister this serves, and what do you make of what's on the list?
Well, I think it's important for him to show that he's doing what he said he was going to do. And he said he was going to diversify our markets. We are going to get more of our resources out of the ground and use that as a way to build relationships with other countries. It means not only do we have to get it out of the ground, but we have to find a way to get it to those countries. And he has, from the very beginning, said he's going to do this fast. So really important that he gets some of these projects out there in the public's mind as soon as possible. The creation of the Major Projects Office, the appointment of Don Farrell, both again it's lightning fast compared to what we've seen happen over government in the last 10 years. And he mostly, I think most importantly, needs to show that he is dramatically different from his predecessor, that rather than talking about getting things done, he's going to actually try and get things done. Now, having said that, I think that there's some truth in what the Conservatives are saying, that some of these projects have already have been well underway. I mean, the Northwest Transmission Line, and now what was then called, had it under a different name, has been partly done, and what they're talking about is completing it and extending it. That's important. That's been discussed, though, for a long time. And, I think it's great that he's recommitting to it or committing to it from the federal level for the first time, because in the decade of the Trudeau era, it was impossible to get any federal cooperation on any of this stuff, even though it was necessary. So I think, what he's signaling is the feds are actually going to finally step up, and for projects that have been well underway, like the second phase of the LNG project in British Columbia, which is something that my government had permitted back in, I think, 2017 or 16, something like that. Great, they're going to take their foot off the neck of the economy and put it back on the gas. I think that's all good stuff.
What do you think the Prime Minister, Tony, wants to signal, and do you think he is signaling that?
Well, I agree with Christy. He wants to signal movement and progress. A couple of problems, though, if I might. First of all, as has been mentioned by Pierre Poilievre, most of these projects have already been approved. So it's not as if they have to, there's no regulatory burden that has to be lifted to get these projects going. They're already going. Maybe what this is about, Vashi, is about financing. Maybe what the Prime Minister is signaling is these projects are approved, but now they're on the special list. And maybe the federal government will be there to help finance these projects, which, again, is very costly, does not involve the private sector financing these things, and means that the government is picking winners and losers. Not always a good strategy. The second big elephant in the room, of course, is there's no oil pipeline on this list, despite the fact that the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta have talked about getting a deal by a Grey Cup Day, which is Sunday. No oil pipeline is in the mix, and I think that's a glaring mistake by the Prime Minister, and really begs the question whether Alberta and Canada can actually work together.
Well, that's going to be, I think, Marco, a really interesting space to watch over the next week, because I was saying on this program last night, the easiest task in journalism over the last 10 years used to be when the Prime Minister said something about resources, calling a premier of Alberta and Saskatchewan, getting them on the TV, and right away I knew what they would be really upset. And that is no longer the case. Like, you reach out to Premier Smith's office right now and she says, she's not to take away from the position she holds, which is very much like, we do want to see that pipeline go forward. She isn't saying, this list, means that it's not going to happen. We are in negotiations. There could be this MOU. How much do you think hinges on that actually being executed? Because it's a real change right now.
Quite a bit. And there's been a change in tone. That's because there's been a change in the relationship, and we're living in a changed world. And part of what I think the Prime Minister was trying to convey today is that as the world has changed, so must we, so must Canada. And so what I think he was really trying to signal with today's second tranche of major projects announcements are three things: speed, streamlining, and more self-reliance. And what I would say to those who would say, well, look, a lot of these projects, they've been in the hopper, is that in the creation of the Major Projects Office, which is designed to accelerate and fast-track the approval, we're going to go from plans to concrete progress. And we're going to do that by coming up with criteria that are all geared towards building. Build fast, build in conjunction with First Nations, build clean, and build an economy that is truly tied from coast to coast to coast. One Canadian economy. So as opposed to deja vu, I think we're going to now see more deja do.
James, I think what's also interesting, though, is that, to my knowledge, at least at this point, none of these 10 or so or 11 projects actually requires them to be declared as in the national interest with C5, meaning it doesn't require the government to subvert an existing law, be it environmental or otherwise, in order to move forward with it, which is less risk politically than stuff that would require C5, which says something, I think.
we all read a lot of the polls. Mark Carney has a leadership advantage over Pierre Poilievre right now. His party seems to be in sturdy shape and continuing its broad level of support from the last campaign, even though the top line numbers relative to the Conservatives are tight. Still waiting for him to risk some of his political capital. Still waiting for him to show that he's really going to take some risks in the national interest. I mean, we were told that the first list of 5 projects was a start, and we knew that some of the projects were going to be already kind of half baked, and they were already kind of in the process of being completed. So kind of don't worry about it. Wait for the second tranche. Well, and the second tranche will maybe bring a little bit more drama. I hope the Grey Cup has a little bit more drama than the Grey Cup list that we saw today, because it was a little bit, frankly, disappointing for those of us who are looking for a prime minister to risk some political capital in exchange for advancing the national interest. The LNG project, for example, in British Columbia, as I understand the details, the federal government announced that they're loaning $140 million from the infrastructure bank to BC Hydro to complete the project is like $8 to $10 billion. This is like a 2% funding announcement. Good, but hardly something that is, going to have Donald Trump anxious that they're going to lose Canada as an economic pillar and have us massively exploiting global markets. So, look, it was a good day, but I don't think it's a day that really lived up to the hype. And I think that's something that I think the Prime Minister needs to be anxious about, is that he continues to massively promise and raise expectations and continues to underdeliver. He did it in his budget last week. He did it with the 5 projects today. And at a certain point, Canadians are going to start thinking, what's the point of listening to someone who doesn't deliver their rhetoric?
Is there potentially more political capital to be expended if the Prime Minister does reach an agreement with Alberta on a potential pipeline and removal of certain climate regulations, Christy?
If the Prime Minister wants to demonstrate something to Albertans and to investors, he should get rid of the tanker ban on the North Coast, which was always just performative, silly messaging from the Trudeau government. And while Alaskans are shipping all kinds of oil right along the exact same route every day of every week. So I think that would be probably more comfort. I think that what Tony said is relevant. The financing question does matter, but when I think about that, I don't think just about government financing. I think about trying to offer comfort and security to all the investors all around the world, in China, Japan, India, South Korea, that do want to invest in Canada, but have been scared away by government's failure to support projects. And I think what Carney is trying to do is instill confidence. And confidence isn't something that that only comes from having a project completed and underway. I think the kinds of things that he's doing now are one by one building confidence that we will be able to attract the investment that we need for some of these projects. And I think some of them should be oil projects. I don't know, though, that he's done very much to support the hopes of the oil industry and the confidence of investors that might want to invest in the Canadian oil industry so far.
Ultimately, that will be, I think, to be fair, Tony, like the proof point, right? I mean, the Prime Minister, to be fair to him, has been explicit that he wants to attract more private investment. Like he hasn't shied away from saying that that's the objective. So we will be able to assess and hold him to account pretty easily by measuring whether or not that investment comes.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the actual reality. The one sector where the private investment is there, you don't need government investment, is oil pipelines, and that's the one that isn't on the list. So I'm a bit perplexed by that. But no, absolutely, I think that this is an important moment, and I agree with Christy as well on this point, that if you want private investment to flow, Vashi, then the key is not just what's on the list, the 10 or 12 or 15, but to have it flow to 500 projects that are waiting in the wings. You need to deal with the legislative framework to make sure that there's not all these impediments that are still in place. It's one thing to say, well, we've got Bill C5 and we can cherry pick which projects can go forward that don't have to have that regulatory burden. Why have the regulatory burden in the first place is what I'd ask.
Well, I'm going to ask the Energy Minister in a few moments after our panel, but so we'll wait for the answer. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, the front bench will reconvene and we'll look ahead to next week's big vote in the House of Commons.
We just released a budget last week. And in that budget, we estimate that the U.S. tariffs and the associated uncertainty that they're causing will cost the Canadian people about 1.8% of our GDP.
We were hoping that after these 10 years, the Liberals might have learned something, that they would introduce, finally, an affordable budget for an affordable future. But instead, what we saw from Mark Carney is a costly credit card budget that doubles the deficit that Justin Trudeau left behind.
The Prime Minister and federal Conservative leader there trading barbs ahead of the biggest test in the House of Commons for the Liberals yet. A confidence vote on support for the budget is set for Monday. What are the political stakes and what might happen with that vote? Let's bring back our front bench, Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. It was just a week ago, Marco, we were wondering out loud as the news broke that Matt Jenner, a Conservative MP, was leaving, resigning as an MP, whether that would change the math. The math will stay the same. The government, however, thanks to Chris D'Entremont, is just too short, the Liberals rather, 2 seats short of a majority. Is there any doubt in your mind that this budget passes?
Well, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic in part because, we're one vote closer to the magic number that we need to pass the budget on that first milestone, which will be next week. There's never a completely zero chance that things couldn't take a surprising twist, as we saw in last week's panel during the commercial segment, which we all made for interesting commentary and television. But I think in the meantime, what I would observe is that it is encouraging if you sit in the Liberal benches and if you're the Liberal government, that Conservatives are seeing elements in a budget that appeal to them and to the people that they represent. For example, the fiscal restraint around public service modernization and working closely with the rank and file of the public service to make it more efficient so we can save and show more responsibility towards taxpayer dollars. I think equally there are elements that appeal to those on all sides of the political spectrum when it comes to building. And that's precisely what the Prime Minister said was at the core of this budget, which is how do we get major projects done? How do we get energy to market? How do we build houses? How do we reinvigorate our defense industrial sector? I mean, those are important initiatives which need to accelerate so that we can create jobs. And by doing that, I think you then speak to and relate to a lot of Canadians who, yes, remain anxious about the current state of the economy and want to see forward progress. And so the fact that people are coming on side, and I don't know how many others there might be. There may still be others, but I think it's encouraging. It shows broad appeal.
Let's split the difference there for a second, James, and ask first on the politics of it, your view of what you think will happen next week, but on the less on the politics within the House and more on what's happened over the last week in your assessment of how the Prime Minister and his team have tried to sell the budget.
I think the budget will pass, mostly because the NDP are broke and broken, and I don't think that they're in a position to trigger an election campaign. So I think they'll find a way to have a couple people stay away or abstain in such a way that allow the Liberals to move forward. Look, the budget, Marco, underlined some of the good things in the budget, and there are some reasonable things in there. Capital cost allowance, $81 billion in new defense spending, a quarter of that for retention, recruitment, and salary increases, the other 3/4 for procurement that allow us actually to have some independence and distance ourselves perhaps from the United States in some ways, and also to embolden us to preach about our closing the gap on 3 to 5% of GDP on defense spending. Like, there's some good things there, lowering the immigration levels for the country in a way that'll be more sustainable for the pressures on our social programs. Those are all good things. However, the high level of indebtedness, the high level of a burden that are still on Canadians, and the lack of any real items in the budget that will relieve in the immediate term the cost pressures on Canadians, those are our real selling features for the Conservatives in their retail effort to attract voters to the Conservative movement. So I think the fault lines are clear. the Conservatives are very proud about their messaging and their ambitions to be the voice for Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet. And the Liberals are very proud of that they have a macro budget by a macroeconomist who thinks that the country is going to be able to shift in a different way. So I think it leads to a good debate and a healthy 2026 and probably a campaign within the calendar year.
Where does it leave the NDP, Christy?
Well, they're not in a good place right now. I mean, the one thing you could argue that the NDP have kind of won out of the budget is that the Carney Liberals were very, very light touch on the changes to the bureaucracy in the federal government, which I've always argued is much, much too big. And they are not demanding big cost-cutting measures by downsizing staff in the federal government. My instinct tells me that they would have been likely to do so had they not been depending on the NDP. So it looks like the NDP actually, from my perspective, did get a little win out of the budget. I'm not sure they're in favor of all of the economic growth and development coming from the resource sector as much, but they are really in tough times. As James said, they have no money. They've got a leadership campaign coming up. They've got tons of discontent within their caucus. This budget isn't going to pass because Conservatives like it. It's going to pass because the NDP cannot afford an election right now. And, I guess they got some small win out of it by a government that is really, has failed to do enough to cut spending within government. But, you can thank the NDP for that. They were quiet about it, but they got something of what they wanted.
Although I think, Tony, from what my conversation, my interviews with Don Davies, they would have liked to see even less restriction on spending. Is there a chance you think the NDP could surprise us?
Well, I was harboring that illusion until I heard today that they still have $23 million of campaign debt. So let me assure your viewers that no political party is going to rush to the polls when they still have that burden on their shoulders. So I think there'll be some diplomatic flu going around the NDP caucus. So I wouldn't worry if I was a Liberal.
I wanted to get everyone as however many minutes we have left in also on the other big story of the week. I started the block off by talking about Matt Genereux. Obviously, Marco, that followed an actual defection from, and you referenced this, from the Conservatives in Mr. d'Entremont to the Liberals. Yesterday, for the first time, Pierre Poilievre addressed questions about this publicly. He'd been talking in the House, but not about anything to do with this. I mean, he said that he would, he was asked a question about whether he would reflect on his leadership and the accusation from Mr. d'Entremont that the office was like a frat house. I'm just going to play a quick clip of what he said, and then I'll get you to weigh in.
So again, I asked you if you thought that if what you thought Mr. d'Entremont meant by your party being run like a frat.
Well,
whether or not you thought that would lead to more MPs leaving your caucus. That's my question for you, sir.
No. So I answered your question. And so the answer that I have back to you is that Mr. d'Entremont this is a quote from just a few months ago, where he said that Liberal food price inflation was inhumane. And you know what? He's right. Thank you.
So, Marco, where do you think this goes from here?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the thing that we can all agree on about Mr. Poilievre is that he's consistent in his style of leadership, if nothing else. And I would say, in spite of some of the constructive criticism that I think that has been offered to him to reflect and recalibrate, he seems to be very much committed to that style that you see. And it must be that in his mind, he believes that ultimately that style will prevail. Now, I do think that losing a member of your caucus to the other side of the aisle is significant. Seeing a second member of Parliament resign fairly abruptly and fairly recently after the last election, after having reoffered again recently to the community, is significant. Having a lot of speculation out there that there may be others within your caucus who may have contemplated or are currently contemplating either supporting the budget or similarly leaving their caucus should cause one to reflect. So I think, to come back full circle to the beginning of your question, if there's one thing that we can make of it, it's that Mr. Poilievre will remain consistent to his style of leadership through thick and thin.
I think that's true for the most part, but there was some evidence in the past few months that he was attempting, or maybe the team around him, James, were attempting something different in, for example, engaging with mainstream media like me in a far less combative way than he did in the press conference yesterday. It feels like that sort of push and pull is playing out publicly. Where do you think this heads?
Yeah, yesterday was a bit feisty and a bit defensive, but it's been a stressful week for the party. And look, I think the floor crossing question seems to be closed. Mr. d'Entremont it seems to be a constituency of one in his crossing of the floor. The Matt Genereux story, I think, we all know, is a little bit more complicated. But pushing that aside, Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the party. The caucus. The thing about Pierre, I think, in his leadership, is that the caucus wants him to win. They want him to be successful. They don't just accept that he's the party leader, that he has engendered a lot of personal support within the caucus that is greater than the public polls show that his support is with the general public, because caucus members see Pierre as, frankly, one of the hardest working people I've ever seen in politics. He is nonstop. He goes to event after event after event, and he's tireless. And they see the effort that he's putting in to try to take the party over the top and to have them be successful. They're frustrated by the fact that he got more votes than Stephen Harper ever got in any of the 5 elections that he contested as leader, and they believe that the vote split and the Donald Trump effect and the persuasion of Mark Carney were the 3 elements that were on the table. And if any one of those 3 elements, that if Mark Carney develops some rust and disappoints the public, if the NDP get up on their feet a little bit, and if the Donald Trump effect is abated in some way, that if any one of those 3 elements changes, that Pierre Poilievre can win. He did better than any Conservative leader did since 1988. And it's just right within their grasp, they feel. And so they're frustrated when things like Chris d'Entremont happens. And so I think the emotional blowback over the floor crossing by some Conservative members was for sure over the top, not helpful, not sort of befitting of a party that wants to have the privilege of governing the country. But it speaks to kind of the emotional frustration that a lot of people there have, that they really want Pierre to win. They want him to do well, and they're frustrated at the disappointment that they've had so far.
Christy, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that Poilievre has changed a little bit more than most people give him credit for. I think I see him trying something a little bit different. It's not quite as loud, quite as heavy-handed as it was. I do think too, I mean, in the Conservatives are not as, it's Liberals that get rid of their leaders a lot, and Conservatives tend to stick with them. And I think there's some truth in what James says, in that Poilievre is going to be allowed to stick around. He's going to make it down to, he's going to have probably some testing times in the spring, early spring of next year. We'll see how that goes. But I think people are prepared to give him the time to get there and face that test and see how he comes out of it once his caucus and his party have had their say.
Tony?
Well, let's make this point. I think that Pierre Poilievre has grown since the end of April. He has grown with adversity that has been thrust upon him, even though he did very well in the election. And I'm going to say something a little bit heretical, perhaps, but I believe that this country needs Pierre Poilievre more than ever when it comes to the issues that most Canadians care about, whether it's affordability or housing or immigration or keeping our streets safe. He is absolutely talking about the things that people really care about. So Pierre Poilievre should remain in his position, and he should lead the Conservative Party in the next election.
Marco, clearly that's the view of Conservatives. I think that's a point to be taken for sure. Does it seem to you like that is what Mr. Poilievre is focused on, particularly with the leadership review coming? Like the focus is that versus, adding to the voter bloc?
Yeah, and I would obviously defer to James and Tony, who know their party a hell of a lot better than I do. And I do think that one of the stronger skill sets that Mr. Poilievre has is being focused like a laser on affordability. And those are issues, those pocketbook issues around being able to afford groceries, being able to afford gas at the pump, being able to afford getting into that first home, that he has shown just an absolute doggedness and focus on. So that is a skill that he possesses. And I think if nothing else, it is a reminder to my political tribe, to the Liberal government, that we too have to focus on those pocketbook issues, even as we talk about macroeconomic framing, as James put. We've got to remember that when we got elected, we cut taxes for 22 million Canadians. We got to remember to emphasize that we canceled the carbon tax. Those were issues that were squarely designed to speak to affordability. And so as we talk about building big things, let's also remember to stress and emphasize affordability, because that is top of mind. And if we don't do that, then you know that Mr. Poilievre will step into that space for sure.
Okay, I got to leave our discussion there. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. Our front bench, Marco Mendicino, Christy Clark, James Moore, and Tony Clement. We'll take a quick commercial here on Power Play. On the other end of that commercial, back to our top story. Second round of major projects. Energy Minister Tim Hodgson is my guest live after that break.
Today's announcement that the Sisson Mine has been added to the major projects list as a project of national interest is a clear sign of the major role that New Brunswick can play in the Canadian economy.
British Columbia is going to be the economic engine of this new economy that we're building going forward, and it is great to see some recognition from Ottawa.
Mark Carney is really, when it comes to getting projects approved, he's kind of like the rooster who thinks that he made the sun go up just because he crowed when the sun went up, right? He's not actually getting anything done. He's just showing up to take credit for things that were going to happen anyway.
Welcome back to Power Play. And our top story, the federal government's second phase of major projects has officially been unveiled. The list focuses on new mines, LNG, and hydro development. And according to the feds, these projects, along with the first round announced in September, are worth a combined $116 billion in investments. What is key to their execution? Energy and Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson is live with us right now. Hi, Minister. A pleasure to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Good to be here.
I think you could hear there Mr. Poilievre's chief line of criticism, which I did want to put to you. It's essentially that, this list isn't as big of a deal as your government is characterizing it as. And he pointed to the Sisson mine, which I believe was approved originally 10 years ago. I know the LNG project on this list, its environmental assessment got the go-ahead in September from your government. Are you making safe choices to mitigate political risk with this list today?
Absolutely not. What we're doing is focusing on showing the world that Canada gets things done, that we've moved from should we build to how do we build, and that's exactly what we've been doing. The Prime Minister has said that the Major Projects Office his goal is to attract $500 billion of private sector capital to Canada so that we can retool and create new jobs in the face of the unjust tariffs and the trade war we have with the United States. The first list of projects will enable $60 billion of investment in Canada. The list announced today will be $55 billion. We're doing what we said we would do.
Does that list provide the certainty for that investment? And I'll take the first list, for example, in which LNG Canada Phase 2 topped the list. From my understanding, LNG Canada has yet to, push the green light, pull the pin, whatever you want to call it, on moving forward with that investment. They had yet to make a final investment decision. They haven't done so since they got on that list, unless you know something I don't.
So what LNG Canada 2 has said is they will be making their final investment decision early next year. They're reconfirming all of their pricing with their general contractors. And the goal, and they've been clear, is to make an announcement early next year. So we are working hard to attract what would be one of the largest private sector investments in the history of Canada. That is in everyone's interest in Canada.
And certainly, I'm not arguing that it isn't in anyone's interest. I'm simply putting to you, if I recall, prior to them being put that project being put on the list, they had already been saying that they would make a final investment decision in early next year. So being put on the list didn't exactly accelerate the certainty with which you're saying, your government is providing investors like LNG Canada.
So I know your audience doesn't always have complete clarity on how these projects work, but there are a huge number of decisions still for the proponent to make. There were a number of things they needed from the federal and provincial government that through the Major Projects Office were coordinated between the federal government and the provincial government, and that clarity has been provided to the proponents. There's 5 different equity proponents for LNG Canada 2. They say they have what they need from us now, and they will be making their decision in the spring. So we have significantly advanced the likelihood that we will see a final investment decision in the spring.
They had also raised the prospect of more certainty around GHG. And our audience will know, and certainly I have clarity around the fact that there are a bunch of companies basically that together form LNG Canada, and some of them have made their own requests for more clarity and certainty around your GHG policy as well. In the budget, your government said basically that the emissions cap could be removed, predicated, though, on a number of different things happening, including the strengthening of the industrial price on carbon, but you did not define what that meant. Why not create the certainty when you had the chance?
What we have said is and Minister de Bruzen and the Prime Minister are taking the lead on this, that if we follow through on the methane regulations, which we plan to do, and if certain initiatives are done on a carbon capture basis, we would not need to move forward with the emissions cap. And we stand by that. And I think we've given the clarity LNG needs to make their decision. They're comfortable with where we are and are planning to make that decision in the spring. And I'm quite hopeful from the conversations I've had with all 5 of the proponents there that we'll have a positive investment decision. I believe the CEO of Shell, who's the lead in that particular project, has been quite optimistic and said he thinks Canada is one of the very best places in the world to invest. So I'm quite optimistic that we'll have a good outcome in the spring.
Are you worried about Alaska LNG and competition for capital now that Trump is so clearly backing that project, that they even went to APEC and signed a deal with South Korea?
Look, the world is full of competitors. Canada's not afraid to compete. I think we're very comfortable that when we compete, we'll win. What we hear from Japan, what I heard from the Minister of Energy from Japan, what I heard from the Minister of Energy from Korea when they were here for the G7 a couple of weeks ago, is they are very keen to buy Canadian LNG. They view Canadian LNG as a safe source of supply. They view Canada as a country that's not going to use access to LNG for political coercion. And they really like the fact that we produce the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world. Both those countries find that quite attractive. In fact, Japan at the G7 signed an agreement, initiated an agreement where we can improve our carbon accounting for LNG so that they can be more comfortable that the Canadian LNG is the best product out there, because they want to buy our clean LNG.
Is it your view that you're providing enough of incentive, though, for them to invest in the projects here, given and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but Trump has gone on Fox. He's talking about it nonstop. His delegates are out there. It is a huge deal to the White House. And if they're good at something, it's selling, right? And they went to APEC. They made a deal. The signal, I spoke to a number of executives today. The signal was we're moving on an aggressive timeline. We're still waiting on capital investment decisions, as you pointed out, next spring.
So I don't think Alaska LNG has hit final investment decisions. So I'm focused on Canada, and what I hear from our allies, and I heard this in Germany, I heard this in the UK, we heard it from Japan, we heard it from Korea. They became beholden to one country for their LNG. They became beholden to Russia. They all realized that was a terrible mistake and that cost their economies dearly. They've all been clear to us that they do not want to become beholden to one other country, and that Canada represents a very important diversity of supply opportunity for them that they're keen to take advantage of.
Just before I let you go, Minister, I did want to ask you about, I know you and the Prime Minister don't love talking about getting questions about pipelines, and often your response is around that there's no official proponent. I concede that. But what we have heard from potential proponents is something that I mentioned in the conversation about LNG, which is a requirement that they say they need for more certainty around the types of policies that they have identified as irritants, the tanker ban, the emissions cap, which I would put to you respectfully is not as clear as you make it out to be. I don't understand when the industrial carbon price reaches the level that strengthening said it would in the budget, and a host of other policies basically that they say, like C-69, are standing in the way of them coming forward and saying, I want to build this pipeline. Why have C5 to get around a regulatory burden when you could just remove that regulatory burden in the first place?
So what I heard Premier Smith say 2 days ago, and I understand she said again today, is she's very happy with our list, and that she is optimistic about the memorandum of understanding that is in active discussions between the federal government and the Alberta government, and she remains very optimistic there's a good outcome for both Canada and for Alberta. I believe I'm up in Timmins, so I didn't get to see all of the Prime Minister's comments today, but my understanding is he also said that he felt good about the negotiations with Alberta. And so I think we need to let them take their course, and we'll learn very soon whether we've got to a good place or not. But I'm feeling quite optimistic.
Just very quickly, I'm not asking on behalf of Premier Smith. I'm sort of speaking about it in the framing of all the companies that you have said haven't come forward basically to pitch a pipeline, and they have clearly identified that. I understand you're saying leave it to we'll wait for the MOU, but do you have in principle a position as Minister of Energy? Should that tanker ban be gone? Basically, that's the only thing standing in the way.
So I think I think a really important part is an industrial carbon price, and I think Alberta and the federal government both agree that we need clarity on an industrial carbon price. That's one of the core parts of the discussion around the MOU. We've said in our budget we intend to give the industry clarity through up to 2050, what an industrial carbon price would look like. If we did that, that would provide the impetus for something like Pathways to get built. Pathways would fundamentally change the carbon intensity of our oil industry, and that's a key precondition for moving forward with a pipeline. The Prime Minister's been clear about that. I think Premier Smith is also comfortable with that as a approach for going forward. That's a live conversation as part of the memorandum of understanding, and from what I'm hearing from Premier Smith and from the Prime Minister, we're getting very close on that.
Is the tanker ban part of the live conversation, though? That's my question.
I think we're focusing on first things first. The first thing we need to do is figure out an industrial carbon price and figure out how we get Pathways built. And I'm not going to get into the details of private discussions. What has been very public is part of the discussion between the federal government and Alberta is we need to create an environment where Pathways gets built as a first step. And to do that, we need clarity on an industrial carbon price so that the industry can plan how to develop their resources in an environmentally responsible way.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate your time this evening very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot. You too. Tim Hodgson is the Minister of Natural Resources and Energy. We're back in just a moment.
These emails prove absolutely nothing other than the fact that President Trump did nothing wrong. And what President Trump has always said is that he was from Palm Beach and so was Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was a member at Mar-a-Lago until President Trump kicked him out because Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile and he was a creep.
Calls for the U.S. government to fully release the Epstein files are growing louder among both Republicans and Democratic lawmakers. The U.S. House of Representatives is now set to vote next week on forcing the Justice Department to release more files related to the investigation into Epstein after more than 20,000 files from the late child sex offender's estate were made public this week. Those emails shed more details on Trump's past relationship with Epstein, which has brought the politics of it all to a fever pitch, a perfect point to bring in our Washington bureau chief, Joy Malbon. Hi, Joy. Good to see you. Tell us a little bit about how we got here, how the president is responding, and where this thing goes.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The Epstein scandal has consumed all of Washington after a bombshell dump of private emails from the estate of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Thousands of them, and thousands of them actually mention the name Donald Trump, which is putting the relationship under new scrutiny. One email to Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, says a victim spent hours with Trump at his home. In another email to a journalist, Epstein said, of course Trump knew about the girls. Another Epstein email confirms former Prince Andrew was photographed with Virginia Giuffre, contradicting the former prince's story that he never met Virginia, who alleges that the prince sexually abused her as a teenager. So this is just blowing up in Washington. Donald Trump is furious. He refuses to answer questions about this. But as you said, this is all coming to a vote. As one Republican said, this is a PR disaster for the White House. And Donald Trump, you know, he's frustrated with all these questions. He calls it a smear job, a Democratic hoax, and he's denied any wrongdoing. But he is going against his promise, Vashi, to MAGA supporters to release all the files. And this White House, they're just struggling to try and contain it all.
I just have a few seconds, Joy, but isn't that the key, the fact that this means so much to his supporters?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. You've got this pressure campaign on Lauren Boebert to not side with the Democrats to force this vote. So this is going against him, and no one can understand. Wait a second. If you promise to release these files, why all of a sudden are you not going to do this? Why is the Trump administration backing off on all of this? So, of course, people are crying, ooh, cover up. But next week, well, hopefully it will go to a vote, and it could lead to the release of the Justice files.
Big week in Washington next week. Thanks so much, Joy. Appreciate it. Our Washington bureau chief, Joy Malbon, live in D.C. We're back in just a moment. Welcome back to Power Play. The Prime Minister today announcing a second round of so-called major projects, which he did say would be announced prior to the Grey Cup, which takes place over the weekend. Lots of reaction to that list. Projects in BC, in New Brunswick, in Ontario. We'll have full coverage of that reaction into this evening and tomorrow right here on CTV News Channel. That does it for us tonight at Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellas. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful rest of your night.